All right, 10 o'clock Central Time. We'll get this webinar started. Thank you everyone for joining us here for, that's the wrong one. Why does that say part 2, not part 3? Hey, there we go. Sorry, got the wrong start slide there. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us for part 3 of our webinar series here. A journey through our ITSM with Service Manager and Cyrusson. My name's Brett Moffat. I'm the Solutions Architect for Cyrusson here in Asia Pacific, and joined with me here today for part 3 as with the other parts is Joy Van Hedrick, but this time he's actually here with me in person here in Australia. Joy Van.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Brett.
Enjoying your trip to Australia so far?
Yes, very much so. More so the experience in the actual weather, but
the weather's been a bit up and down, but yeah, hopefully the seeing kangaroos and all of those fun things has been a bit of enjoyment for you.
Yes, definitely a lot of things you don't see anywhere in Japan, or a lot of things even in the US, but definitely having a blast, that's for sure.
Awesome, excellent. So cool. So we're going to get into this today. We're going to be talking about change management and yeah, how to look at your ITSM journey with change management, and specifically around Service Manager and being able to use it in Cyrusson as well. So let's get into this and have a bit of a look. So this entire 3-part webinar series is brought to us by basically to get people to see our new analyst portal community edition. So it's absolutely free version of the analyst portal that allows you to be able to interact with incident management inside a web browser, inside our console, inside our web portal. And yeah, totally free. So if you don't have our portal yet, have a look at our community free app of the analyst portal. And yeah, if you need any assistance with that, feel free to reach out to me. And happy to be able to walk you through getting that set up and installed for you. What's so good about the analyst portal community edition above the out-of-the-box HTML portal that Microsoft provides is it does actually allow you to create, view, and edit incident records, whereas the out-of-the-box one is just purely a end-user self-service portal there to be able to consume request offerings. So it really allows us to easily manage work items, consolidate a list of all our incidents, and so forth. It is a modern HTML5 design, and it's 100% browser, device, and OS agnostic. So you can take it between your PC and also your phone or even your tablet to be able to access all that information, no matter where you are on site with customers. Version 8.12.1 now no longer requires a key, so you can just download it and use it free for life, which is fantastic. And with the introduction of the new Analyst Portal Community Edition, we're actually providing the option for you to get formal support from Cyrusson on that. You can actually purchase just a support package to be able to assist you with getting that up and running and functioning inside your environment. If you don't want to pay for formal support, you can take advantage of the Cyrusson community to connect with other customers and ask them for assistance with any particular issues that you might have. All right, so looking into, let's do a recap of each of the parts of the webinar that we've gone through. The first part was best practices for building incident requests. And it really is the start of your ITIL journey. Usually people that are starting off with ITIL and IT service management definitely start with incident management to be able to track and catch those break fix type issues. We went over what incident management actually was defined according to ITIL. We also went over incident management. And of course, I forgot to turn off my phone. before we started the webinar. So maybe I should turn that down. We also covered off incident management in System Center and Service Manager, what that actually looks like in the console, and then of course what it actually looks like with inside the Cyrusson products, and the best practices to actually create those and track those over time. I think actually let's go back one on that one. If you did miss this webinar, you can go back and actually see that webinar on our YouTube channel. There were some really important pieces in that. I think focusing on the correct naming and creation of management packs was something that was really important in there, and also the importance of good categorization of your incidents to be able to track for reporting and of course the metrics over time. So definitely worth going back and watching that one if you haven't watched it. Then we did part 2, which was the efficient handling of service requests. So we're looking at the benefits of service request management. This was sort of the next phase of IT service management around not so much something is broken, but more I want to request something from IT, but it doesn't necessarily have to be IT, it can be any other segment of the business as well. We then looked at service request best practices around process definition, workflow and automation, and also the advanced request offering from Cyrusson. Now, again, if you missed part 2, I suggest you go back to our YouTube channel and you can actually see that webinar in full. Now, today we're talking about change requests. So this really is moving, continuing along that ITIL journey that many of us are actually on. And it really is sort of the third piece in that, that puzzle there before we go into problem management and also release records as well. Change management is one of those fundamental pieces of everything that we do inside IT to make sure that we don't disrupt things inside our organization, production systems and so forth, but also to track what was changed. So if something does go wrong, we know what was done, that we can actually back out and all of those things as well. So it's really important to get change request and change management processes dialed in really well for our organization. First of all, to make sure that you know, we don't make those sorts of mistakes, but also to make sure that we don't spend a huge amount of wasted time chasing these change requests. I certainly knew in my experience when I was working with different organizations and you had to create change requests, it was the most painful experience possible, and nobody liked to do it because it took hours and hours of filling in paper-based forms to be able to put the information in. So many times you cut corners or didn't provide the right information. So we've got to try and make that as seamless as possible, make it as easy as possible for engineers to be able to fill in that information so we get accurate information. But we also need to make sure that we capture enough information that we have the information that we need to make good business decisions. Okay, so as far as ITIL is concerned, change management, standard methods and procedures to handle all changes in your environment. And basically a change is an event that alters any configuration item. So as defined within ITIL, a configuration item is pretty much anything with a property. So anything with some sort of value that's associated to it, like an AD user has a first name and a last name, a computer has an IP address, a MAC address, and so forth. We've got all that information there, so you can see some other examples there. But you know what, fundamentally, something that carries risk that's associated with that change, that's where we come into creating those changes. If we know that there's not a risk associated with it, yeah, we can record that change as just a minor property, and something that we don't need to do too much testing with. The overall goal of change management is to minimize risk, of course, of those changes, to keep records of what was actually changed and when, and to enable effective communication throughout the organization to ensure that people are aware of what's going on when that change occurs. Now, out of the box, System Center Service Manager gives us 3 templates out of the box, which is a standard, normal, and an emergency change template. We're going to be focusing just on those 3 types here today, and sort of what they look like inside different people's organizations. You may have different levels of changes inside your organization. I have seen people have a whole range of different levels of changes within their organization, and I think it gets a bit messy after 3. Most things you can fit within those 3 change categories, and we'll have a look at some of those examples here as we go into the demo. Cool. So what defines a standard change compared to an emergency change, compared to a normal change? So this is why I'm going to bring in Joy Barn here and really look at some real examples, some real life examples of really what a standard change would be. So Joy Barn, when you go into a customer environment, when you see a standard change, what are the sorts of things that are just standard?
Certainly, the key piece about a standard change is that it is pre-approved. And so it's something that, even though it may have a review activity, it's almost definitely going to be approved because it's something that you do in a repeatable fashion. So something like updates, Windows updates or software updates, or something that you have to deploy. It's less risky to deploy it than to not deploy it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And something that you know is going to happen multiple times. Even if it's something that's not repeatable, it's just something that you must do at least once. And that's the key piece here, is that it's definitely going to be approved. It has to happen. It still carries a little bit of risk, and it still affects multiple people, but it's going to happen. And so you kind of predict that you need it to happen. You just need to have some checks and balances in place to make sure that nothing goes wrong when you do implement the change.
Cool. So this is the stuff you do on a regular basis, more for record keeping of what actually happened to that CI.
Yep. Yeah, that is correct.
So what would be an example of a standard? What's the standard sort of business process that would happen that you would create a standard change for?
Usually updates is the #1 most common standard change.
Okay.
And this could just be Windows updates, or it could be updates to any various products. Say you're upgrading the Saracen portal from whatever version to the newest possible version. That will be a standard change because it's going to contain a bunch of bug fixes, but then you may also need to do a little bit of extra testing for some of the extra features within that same change. So they're going to be approved, but you might still have a couple activities for some testing, some validation. Maybe you have some extra customizations of your own that you want to throw in during this change. And that could be created as a standard change, or that would normally be created as a standard change.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. I mean, patch management is something that we do on a monthly basis, or maybe even more often than that. But we follow the same procedures time and time again. So that makes sense. So an emergency change, I mean, these are the ones that always seem to frustrate people, that they need to get something done or reboot a server or those sorts of things, but they have to follow that process. So what really defines, what's the definition of an emergency change?
Something that's not pre-approved, but also something with a little bit more either risk or urgency, or both. For example, if you have a security issue and you need to patch it immediately, you don't have time to go through a major process or go through a number of reviews to make that happen. And so in that case, you might get together with your change advisory board immediately, and it might not be your normal sized CAD meeting, but it might be a smaller kind of CAD meeting where some very key players that are available right now can help out and approve or kind of manage the change as it goes along.
Okay, so like a mini cab is part of it. So you'd have different uh, um, approval levels for an emergency one to be able to get it through to be able to fix that problem in a more urgent manner.
Yep, that is correct. It will almost always be higher risk than both a standard or a normal change, but you don't really have any way around that since it is kind of an emergency. You have to get it done as fast as possible. And during the meetings or during the process, you do weigh in the risk. That's part of the change request workflow process. But then after you weigh in, you make the chance, or you make the choice, you take a chance, and then complete the change. And hopefully it works out without having to create a problem or create an incident after the fact, which we'll touch on momentarily. But for the most part, it's something that is not pre-approved. It's got a little bit more risk, a little bit more publicity, but it has to be done a lot faster.
Yeah. So anything that's really going to negatively impact the business running in the short term, any of those line of business applications, those sorts of things, certainly fall under an emergency change to make sure that the business continues to function over time. And then, of course, you've got normal, which is pretty much everything else, everything that doesn't fit into well, we've done this all the time. We do this all the time, a standard one, and things that aren't emergency that have to get out the door right now. Normal pretty much fits everything else.
Yep, that is correct. And Service Manager does this kind of in an odd way, where it gives you categories right out the box, except it gives you a major and a minor category for change requests, and those are indeed both normal. So it is following standard ITIL practices. It just looks kind of odd at first glance. But then sometimes you'll go in and you'll either remove one of those or you'll just want to use one of the two of those and call it a normal change, which is perfectly fine. Alternatively, you could create a bunch of other different types of normal changes, something that isn't pre-approved, which we'll touch on in a moment as well. And I've got a couple examples to show. But pretty much everything else would be considered a normal change.
Cool. So what is actually the difference between a change and a service request? We've talked about service requests before, and service request is something that someone requests. And really, I guess when we talk about requesting a change to a system, we want to request a new hard drive to be put in or request a new database to be spun up. So what's the difference between a change and a service request?
There are a couple differences, but they are indeed pretty similar. One of the easy things to spot is where the request is coming from. If it's coming from an end user, usually it's going to be a service request. If it's coming from anyone else, usually an analyst or an admin or even a higher up, it could be a change request. But the main difference, if you actually analyze the request itself, is the number or the risk that it poses to the organization, along with the publicity. So how risky is it? How much damage can it possibly do? And how many people will that affect? If you get a request for just someone's computer, they want a new computer, they want to change to the computer, it's a pretty low risk because their computer's operational and they're just having a modification done to it, and it only affects one person. But if you have a request for a server, an end user probably wouldn't do that. And if they did, then it would probably need some extra approval, and it would affect multiple people. So that wouldn't really be a service request at that point. An analyst would usually put in that type of request. So that's usually a dead giveaway if it's a service request or a change request. But regardless, if it's got a lot of risk and a lot of publicity, it would be a change request in that case.
Okay, so sometimes we do see, I think anyone that's had any experience in IT for long enough, that every now and then someone will actually raise a service request for something that actually is fairly high risk or fairly intense. So it really needs to become or include a change request in that. So is that where the note there that sort of says the conversion from an SR to a CR, is that needed, the ability to be able to change a request like that into a change because it is going to impact the business in some way?
Yes, most definitely. Every now and then an end user will indeed submit a request And this could come from anywhere. It could come from your service catalog, could come from an analyst on the phone that doesn't quite know at the time that it's a service or that it's a change request. And so after either doing a little bit of investigation or realizing that it's beyond the scope of a normal service request, you will indeed need to change it to a change, and then do the proper checks and balances for the change. And this could be just the normal conversions you keep. You close or complete the SR and you create a new CR, or you could also keep this original SR open for communication with the customer and then use the new CR to complete the change, which could potentially affect other SRs or IRs as well, and then respond to those original work items accordingly.
All right. Well, I'll let you swing over to a demo and you can show some people some really cool ways of being able to change requests.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Brett. All right, so the first thing I want to show, oops, not that one. Now let's go ahead and renew the session. Give that a second to check in. And I do have a task that is available that will let you convert a service request to a change request. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that and head to active work. And I will just open up any SR that I have. And one of the really easy things that you can do in the Cyrusyn portal is create some custom tasks. And all of these are done via JavaScript, but if you aren't really too familiar with JavaScript, all of these or a bunch of these tasks are available on the community that you can just simply download and copy and paste. And they will have the full functionality that you'll either see in the lab or that you can take a look at on the community. We've got a large library of extra add-ins that you can grab. So from this one, I have a new task called Create CR from SR. And I'm just going to fill in some extra info there so that you can see it properly does copy that. And then we will use the Create CR from SR task. And we get to select a template in this case. This is kind of customizable. So you can either show or hide or force it to use a specific template for your change request. In this case, we will pick a minor change. So both the minor and the major are out of box from Service Manager, and they are a normal change. So it's not a pre-approved change, but it's not an emergency change. So it's going to be one of these or one of your custom changes. In this case, we'll pick a minor change. We'll hit OK. And it will create a brand new change request and then take us to it. So this CR is now a copy of this SR, unless it doesn't want to, might be a lab issue, but normally it refreshes after that and returns you back to the page. But in either case, the CR is indeed created, and that's a really easy way to convert or just create and relate a related CR to your SR instead of having to treat the SR like a CR and kind of add some activities that don't quite belong or change some enumerations that don't quite fit. Right. The next item I want to show, sometimes you might have an end user that has to create a change request. And this could be a standard change, so it's something that's pre-approved, or it could just be one of your templates that doesn't quite get pre-approved. Another example of a normal change, that's the type of change that fits everywhere else, is a firewall rule, where it's going to happen time and time again, but each firewall request is going to be different, and it's going to need a little bit of scrutinization by your change board or by your engineering team to make sure that something fishy isn't going on. And so in that case, you would create a new template, or you might want to create a new template for change requests for your firewall rules or firewall requests. And it might have a couple of review activities in it that are never pre-approved, but are always going to be checked out and filled in by a responsible party. And then once you have that change request template filled out, you can create a request offering and place that in the portal. In this case, I have a request server asset change request offering. And this one is a little bit basic, so don't laugh at it too much. But the idea is that you can fill in some info and then hit save. And it will not create an incident or a service request, but actually creates a change request directly. And this is a really simple way of just ensuring that your users use a change. Even if your users or sometimes your analysts don't even know if something should be a service request or a change request, they don't really have the option. They just have that one request often, which follows your hopefully well-documented procedure with the specific workflow process behind it.
So particularly good for a standard change that all you had to do was particularly enter maybe a description or some key pieces of information that you need. But then the reason and the test and the backup plan are all part of the template. So there's no need to have to go through and review any of those pieces as well.
Yep, absolutely. And then another item I want to show, we have a change calendar as well. This is another customization that's available for download off of the community. And what this does is give you a visual calendar of all of the changes that are occurring in your organization and when. And this is based on each change's scheduled start date versus scheduled end date. So if we take a look at any CR and take a look at our planning tab, we have a start date and an end date. And all the calendar does is grab when all of those dates occur and place them on a calendar so you know when each change is occurring. And that way you can do some extra planning. For example, if we have an academic freeze down here during this week, we know that we cannot schedule any changes involving systems that are of the academic variety in this case. So we would plan our changes for a different time frame. Similar to this note, one thing that is really nice to do with changes is add related items. So you can do this with incidents as well, but if we scroll down to our affected CI list, you can add various CIs. So if you remember, a change is related to any type of configuration item. One common configuration type that is involved with changes are business services. And you can relate any type of change to a business service being either a CI itself, so a computer, or an entity that contains multiple CIs, for example, Active Directory or Exchange. Once you have business services in your environment and you have the servers related to them, you can relate the change request to the business service and then see which servers are affected, which really allows you to plan changes and kind of plan who should be involved or what steps should be involved, not just with the business service itself, but with the actual servers. For example, if you need to turn on some extra logging or back up some extra databases that you weren't quite aware of as the either service manager admin or even as the Exchange admin, you might not know what else you have to do on some of the other servers. You could just add the business service, know that all of the different related servers are going to be related, and then have some processes check and make sure that all of those different servers are indeed accounted for during the change. So some pretty nifty stuff that you can do there, all fairly out of box and all available within the Saracen portal. It does take a small amount of time if you haven't set up your list of business services, and it's a lot easier to just do CIs, but you get a lot more of added value out of it, especially when working with changes if you do indeed set up a list of business services. Let's see. Yeah, that's all I have for the demo. Let's actually go back to...
Jump back to the slide deck here. So thank you for that, Joyvan. So the considerations there is what Joyvan was just talking about. As part of that, there is that change calendar. Have a look at that change calendar in the community. Also have a look at the business services within your environment. what CIs are related to what business service that you have, line of business application, those sorts of things with inside your organization. And of course, setting up their approvals, their specific approvals for those individual business services. Also have a look at more of the additional automation and surrounding things like approvals and notifications. You may even want to set up things such as testing or log imports, those sorts of things from other systems to provide your change advisory board, your CAB, of that things like testing has actually been complete. You've actually got those notes associated with that change as well. So historically, you can go back and have a look at the success or failure of the particular tests that were carried out. Now, finally, I guess is putting all of this together from an IT standpoint,
Yep.
or an ITIL standpoint.
Yes. So originally we started with incidents, and this is the most fairly the most basic type of work item where a user might request or submit a ticket for something's wrong. So one single user has an issue with one single machine, and they can't figure out why it works. They contact the help desk, the service desk, and the service desk starts investigating. In the meantime, the service desk sets up a new machine for the user or a loaner machine for the user, so they can investigate the first laptop and see what's wrong with it. Could be a hardware issue, could be a software issue. They don't know. They need a closer look. So the end user then has an SR to set up the loaner machine, which could take multiple steps, but it's a documented process with some very specific workflow steps behind it. And suddenly, you end up with multiple users with the same issue. And so you have to then set up multiple SRs or multiple loaner computers to debug that issue, or rather to give to the end users while you debug that issue. So currently we're using both incidents and service requests, but we know that there's some type of pattern. And so after enough troubleshooting, you figure out that there's a software issue that can be fixed, or this issue will be fixed with a software update. But this software update then covers risks. It could affect people that aren't having the issue. It could fix this issue but cause a completely different, even worse issue. So you create a change request that goes through this process and then kind of troubleshoots or researches and finds out if it's the best solution. And tying in the other pieces of ITIL, you also have problems and release records. All the incidents would then be potentially related to a problem, and then the change request would also be related to the problem. The change request is more so on applying the update and fixing it. The problem is more so on collecting the incidents, making sure that there's a pattern, and then researching why it's broken. So once you have the PR, usually that's when you would create the change, and they're all kind of tied together. You can have multiple both incidents and then analysts and sometimes even end users, depending on your organization, making comments or applying notes on the problem to help provide some type of resolution analysis. But then the change request itself is primarily only analysts that will be doing the testing, doing the updates, and finalizing, making sure that everything's working correctly. And then sometimes you would also need a release record as well, which will let you primarily manage your change requests. So you'd have one release record, which could have potentially multiple change requests in it. And then there is some out-of-box automation within Service Manager as well, so that you can have one release record with activities that automatically complete the final or intermediary dependent activities within change requests. And it just makes it a really easy way to see exactly which software, which updates you've applied, the analysis behind them, why you've chosen those, who was involved, the business services involved, all from one single record with relationships to all of the previous records, in a really just easy way, easy to report kind of method. And then, of course, after the change requests or change request is completed, you would then return all the loaner equipment back to the end users, which would be the final step of the CR. Sometimes potentially the final step of the release record as well, but usually CR, since CR in this case would imply that there was an issue. And then that would close any of the work items involved.
That's it. All right. So I hope that all makes sense. If you do have any questions, please enter them in the questions box of the GoToWebinar application, and we'll try to get to an answer there for you really quickly. So in case you did miss part 1 or 2, there are the links there to the YouTube channel for part 1 and 2 of this webinar series. I also wrote a blog article a little while ago now on change management, and I created a bit of a change management checklist, best practices to avoid common pitfalls of implementing change management. So there's a link there to that. If you go to cyrusson.com/blog, you'll see all our archive of other blog articles and some fresh blog articles as we come up with them as well. If you don't have the Analyst Portal Community app, feel free to go to cyrusson.com/analyst-portal-community and grab that as well. If you are looking for some troubleshooting or some custom solutions inside your environment, head over to the community page there, community.cyrusson.com, and start the conversation with other customers, but also Cyrusson support people there as well. If you want to look at paid support packages for the community portal, send us an email at team@cyrusson.com. We can assist you from there. And that's it. That's it for this webinar. Join us next week for a webinar on the CMDB portal that has just been released as part of version 9 of the full paid version of the portal. We'll be going into having a look at how you can start to edit some CMDB configuration items, but also bring in your own custom configuration items as well. So if you've created custom CIs, actually starting to bring them into the Cyrusson portal as well, and starting to use those from the web as well. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining us today and taking time out of your day. If you do have any questions, please enter them into the questions pane, and we'll stick around for another minute or so just in case anyone's got any questions. But apart from that, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joyvan, yet again.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brett.
Okay, thanks, guys. All right, thanks, Stuart, for a question there. Any advice on using change templates? Small number of generic templates or larger number of more specific? That's a really good question. And the answer is it depends. It really depends on what you've got going on in your environment. I'll let Joyvan answer this one, but in my experience, for things like normal changes that are automatically approved, I usually have a huge number of templates for those that are driven from request offerings. Specific things that happen and they're already approved and there's already a known process for it, create that template so you don't miss that process, so the process isn't screwed up in any way, shape or form. For the normal changes or emergency changes that come out of the box, normally I just have the standard template and not have a whole bunch of custom ones. But in your experience, Joyvan?
Yep. Generally, more is better. To the point that you don't want it to confuse your analysts, because your end users are not going to be selecting the template, but your analysts potentially will be if you don't have that set up within a service catalog. And so as long as they always select the correct one, either because it's properly named or it's access restricted or it's funneled through a certain interface, then more is generally better. But if you end up with too few and you always have to manually add some activities, then that's also not very efficient. And so in that case, the optimal thing to do, which will be a little bit tedious, would be to still create more templates, but then restrict how the analysts can access them.
The most time efficient way of using those changes is really to make sure that the process is followed. So if there is a strict process for rebuilding the server or adding a new server into a particular farm, or patch management, for example, we get the patches in, we test them on a select number of machines, we then review that after a certain number of days, we then have change board, review those success failure, we then go to deployment, we then do a post-implementation review. That's a standard process that we do every single month. If we follow that, if we have that already templated in there, then we don't miss that process. If we have to manually fill that in every single time, that's a real pain. Yes, you're going to have some emergencies that pop up or some changes that are completely random and we're going to do once and there's no point in building a template for. But those things that we do even semi-regularly, it's great to be able to put it in that process. It's a great way of being able to document the steps needed to do that change successfully. So I hope that answers the question, Stuart. Any other questions out there? If there's any other questions, if there's no other questions, we'll call it a day. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to you joining us for the next webinar. Thanks, Jovan.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everyone.